forward. I look forward to working with Minister Chen and your Vice Premier, along with my counterpart, Commerce Secretary Gary Locke, when we chaired the Joint China Committee on Trade next fall, hopefully immediately preceding President Obama's to China. So we have great work ahead of us. Trade is going to be an integral part of building and strengthening this relationship, but we need voices, we need thoughtful leaders like you to help us make the case, not only here but in China as well, of the strength, of the wisdom of having a strong relationship, productive between our two great countries. So thank you for the opportunity to share these brief thoughts with you. I look forward to working with and meeting all of you.
And you are just as youthful as you were when you were helping Senator Benson in his very important work in the United States Senate. And
you're as diplomatic as you always were.
And I want to tell you that my relatives who live in Dallas think that you were the greatest mayor that city ever had, and they were sorry to see you leave and come to Washington, but we're delighted to have you here. I want to just ask you a couple of questions, if I can, Mr. Ambassador. We in the United States and American business for a long time has been complaining about China not being open enough to American business, and many of those complaints are legitimate. But last year, or maybe 2 years ago now, time gets away when you get to be my age, but a Chinese oil company, Chinese CNOOC, the overseas Chinese oil company, attempted to expand and purchase Unocal. And this was from a business standpoint, this made sense. It was defeated primarily by political pressure in the Congress of the United States. I perceive that the Chinese, much like the Japanese did in the later part of the 1970s to early 1980s, will start moving much of some of their operations, Chinese companies, in the United States, if we will foster a favorable attitude towards Chinese companies moving in here. And I wanted to ask you, as our new trade negotiator, would you be amenable to trying to persuade or put a better face on allowing Chinese corporations to come to the United States? And would you be in a position perhaps to discuss these matters from a media level and a public policy level and with the Congress of the United States, as perhaps this is a way of balancing the trade deficit? Chinese corporations coming to the United States, employing American workers and producing their products here. That's my view, and I'd like to get your reaction.
Well, I don't know if I want to be like President Obama or Sarah Palin and answer a different question. I think I'd rather tell you what frightens me, humbles me, enchants me, and gives me hope. I think in broad terms, one, I am uniquely positioned in this office of U.S. Trade Representative, first of all, to be an advocate for a rules-based trading relationship as it relates to trade. But if we carried that principle forward in all elements, then I think we as a nation have to be mature enough to want to grant the same privileges to any nation that we see as a partner and as an equal, which China very much is, as we would want them to do for us. So whether we use a basic biblical philosophy for some of us that we learned as grade kids that you do unto others as you would have them to do unto you, or whether we used a principle based in law, to me it's hard to argue against a principle that if it's good for America's businesses to invest around the world, that we would want to close our borders and our shores to those who would do the same. President Obama made the comment, I think shortly after the G20, that the notion that any nation now can somehow withdraw from the global community is just not one that is defensible in this current day and time. And if this current economic crisis has taught us anything, it's that all of our fates are inextricably intertwined. So it is our task then to operate in an environment in which we can use logic, I think, and reason when we can use the factual strength of this relationship between the U.S. and China to deal with what we know to some degree is fear and raw politics that prevents this relationship from being all that it can be. And to the degree that I can be a part of that advocacy and a part of that, I'd like to think, calming intellectual influence, that's a task that I would willingly undertake. But my portfolio, as you know, is decidedly on the trade side. So that's one reason I'm so excited about the opportunity to welcome my counterpart next week so that we can talk about how we can use trade to strengthen this relationship.
Mr. Ambassador, I've talked to a number of American business people about problems, their business problems in China, and trying to expand their operations in China and do this and do that. And many of them, or some of them, feel like that they're not given a fair break by the Chinese government. But they don't want to raise this issue. They don't want to file a WTO complaint because they feel if they do, they'll ultimately be punished by the Chinese government. In other words, the nail sticking up is the one that gets driven down. Now, there has been some talk among American business people of trying to put together a coalition to bring these complaints in sort of a non-anonymous fashion, so they can't be retaliated against. What is your reaction to this sort of approach? This is vague and nebulous, I understand, but it's just now being sort of talked about in the business community. What is your reaction to that kind of approach, and what is your sense about whether or not the Chinese government does punish American business that brings WTO complaints? I know you're very new to the job, and perhaps you don't have an opinion on that at this juncture, but we'd be interested in getting maybe your perspective reaction anyway.
Well, I'm almost certain that the most intelligent response I could make would be to hide behind my newness and not give you a response. I would say this. One, I thought the last question of the two Congress people was particularly insightful in terms of which country perhaps mistakes the other the most, or where we have the most to grow. And I'm reminded when I was mayor, we hosted an international forum every year, and we'd invite foreign ambassadors, and I invited Secretary Kissinger to come and speak to us one year, and he reminded our group just how very different our cultures are, that the United States' strength is our youth, our willingness to move and to change rapidly, and how different it was to be engaged with a partner that measures time in dynasties versus milliseconds. And I say that in that I've come to appreciate that we have to see each other as we are. I also appreciate the fact that China has a very different cultural, political, economic, structural business system than the United States, and that's going to present some unique challenges for us. But I also believe we've made extraordinary success, and we've had great successes in bridging those differences. Now, as it relates to filing cases in the WTO, our office has been very thoughtfully engaged in handling a number of those, and there have been cases where we have filed them without retribution. And in every case where we have been successful, I have to tell you, China has behaved in a very responsible way. There are going to be challenges and will continue to be, but I would hope that before we go immediately to a litigious dispute settlement path, that some of these businesses would give our office the opportunity to be engaged with them as we are beginning to develop a longer track record, a longer history of being able to work with our counterparts in China to see if we can't resolve some of these directly. But I do want to make it plain. China, we have a number of very difficult issues with China, but we shouldn't be quick to blame all of that on COVID. We have tough issues with all of our trading partners. We don't have a better relationship than we do Mexico and Canada. And some of the same issues we have with China, we have with Canada, and we have them with Mexico, and we have them with other countries. In the world of business, we're all seeking to gain competitive advantage, and we understand that. But our office, I think, can be a very persuasive, thoughtful tool to help us bridge those differences.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedule, which I'm sure it's very busy as you're getting on the job here. We're delighted and honored to have you join us here today, and I think I speak for all the Committee of 100 in saying thank you very much for coming, and we wish you Godspeed in your new job, and good luck.
Thank you.